Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. When Russia's fortunes in the course of the war in Ukraine began to flounder, it was quick to turn to the regime in Tehran for military aid. Since then, the infamous Shahed drone has become the symbol of Russia and Iran moving in lockstep. But today, as Israel continues to systematically dismantle Tehran's military-industrial complex, is the tide about to turn? Can Operation Rising Lion, through indirect influence, become Operation Rising Trident? Joining us now is Łukasz Fyderek, political scientist, international affairs analyst, specializing in Middle Eastern issues, director of the Institute of the Middle East and Far East at the Jagiellonian University. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello and good morning.
So let's begin by making a quick assessment of how much Russia depends today on the deliveries of drones and other equipment from Iran.
Well, as we are in mid of 2025, this we cannot say that Iran is an important supplier of Shahed drones to Russia anymore. That was very vital in like 2 years ago, and since then Russia was able to establish its own plant in Yelabuga, where they are producing their own version of Shahed 136, which is called Geran 2. And
a plant that was apparently struck by Ukrainian drones, according to latest reports.
Right. Yesterday there was a single large Ukrainian drone which hit that plant. That plant is interesting due to a number of factors. The one is that's a merge between like a sort of a private initiative and the Russian state. The other interesting thing about that is the fact that they are sort of outsourcing labor to that plant, mainly from impoverished countries, mostly in Africa. So there are a lot of interesting things when we talk about this Yelabuga plant as a sort of new model or new model of Russian military industry of not post-Soviet era but of that late Putin era. So we have Iranian technology, African labor, and let's say private, oligarchical ownership, which is very much related to quite robust, at some point, Tatarstan business community. So a lot of interesting things to look at, but nevertheless, when we are talking about Iranian contribution, this was a sort of a, I don't want to say one transaction of a singular type, but we need to be aware that the partnership between Russia and Iran is a partnership between two. It's a low trust partnership, if we can call it like this, right? So we've got two authoritarian governments very keen on securing their own security sphere and not willing to share too much even with their partners. So
apparently this is becoming even more visible right now, but before we actually take a look at this issue, one quick question. Some reports say that even though Russia has actually taken over the manufacture of the Shaheds, it still imported lots of engines for those from Iran, so that, the manufacturing was not entirely moved into Russia, but it still relied on certain components. Can you confirm that, perhaps?
Well, when we talk about the supply chain, that's an interesting thing. We have some. Shahed drones are not a very sophisticated technology, but producing them in bulk, in large numbers, means that you need to have those components. We had some of them overlap with supply chain between. Supply chain issues which are very visible in the Russian automotive industry. So yes, there is a potential contribution and potential rupture of those supply chains to this plant. We don't know the precise scale of how it may affect the production of those drones, but still it is something on the table, and it may somehow hinder. Plus, let's not forget that besides those Shahed drones, probably the other kinds of Iranian equipments were in talks between those two states. Iran has a lot to offer in terms of asymmetric warfare. They started developing that long time ago with the Russian assistance and North Korean assistance, but they've developed a number of effectors or kinds of weaponry which are useful for that kind of asymmetric warfare, which up until recently were not very interesting for Russia, but in this certain times where Russia is fighting this battle against Ukrainian forces, they may be of some interest. I'm talking primarily about the missile technology and some particular ballistic missile technologies. They may complement their own competences in that sphere, Russian competences in hypersonic missiles, Iranian competences in hypersonic missiles, but as I've said, probably the biggest hindrance up until recently, up until this Israeli attack on Iran, was low trust between two partners.
So straight to the point to conclude this issue, is the war between Israel and Iran likely to affect the situation in Ukraine and the capability of Russia to actually inflict damage on civilian targets in Ukraine in any meaningful way? Is it going to disrupt these supply chains, or will it not be relevant at all?
I mean, it may affect, but not in the way we used to think. Not as a first, let's say, tier effect. I don't see. I see some potential, but not very large potential in terms of limiting supply chains of Russian drones. But the more important thing, or absolutely existential thing for Russia right now, is the price of oil, and their ability to fund their whole state and the military machine. And here is the biggest potential of somehow helping Russia to put their budget on balance if the current Israeli-Iranian escalation will bring higher prices for oil. Then and potentially the Israeli-Iranian war spreading throughout the Middle Eastern region, taking out a number of oil supplies and gas supplies from Iran, but potentially also from the other Gulf states. That would be a huge game changer for Russian-Ukrainian conflict, enabling Russia to fund their war machine. Hopefully, it won't happen. Up until now, we see, let's say, Israeli restraint in attacking Iranian oil and gas facilities. And let's hope this scenario won't materialize.
Well, Iran can still block Hormuz Strait, which would actually bring about a massive change in oil price. Would you say that this perhaps brings even more urgency to the talks of members of the G7, and especially the question of lowering the price cap on Russian oil to $45?
The Hormuz Strait is a little bit overblown medially, I would say, in my opinion. Iran by itself won't do it. That would upset their own experts. That would upset their major customer for their petrochemical products, namely China. But obviously, should Iranian export facilities being attacked or destroyed, then Iranian is sort of creating a blackmail towards the other oil exporting states and saying that if we won't be able to export our oil and gas, then none of the other states of the region will be able to do that. Hence, that's the balance right now. Coming to the G7 group question, well, I don't see that those two things. I don't see the Russian oil cap and the current Iranian-Israeli conflict. I don't see those two things, two issues somehow related to each other. For what matters for this oil price dynamic first and foremost is the potential involvement of the U.S. Troops, or rather U.S. Planes, missiles, and warships in the conflict. Should the U.S. support the attack on Iran, then we can see the potential of widening that conflict and the consequences which we've discussed, namely the rise in oil prices. And then, should this negative scenario materialize, the discussions about Russian oil price cap will not be relevant anymore, because the global demand will be so huge that Russian oil will find its customers, no matter what G7 states will say or will agree upon.
So one final question. You've mentioned limited trust between Iran and Russia. Do you think that Russia is going to take a stance similar to that with respect to the regime in Syria, specifically that if a regime begins to collapse, the Russians do actually prefer dictators who want a ride and not ammunition?
Well, that would be a lovely scenario for a number of reasons, but I would say that we are far, far away from that. Syrian regime situation and Iranian regime situations are absolutely two different things. Syrian regime was weak from the start. It was weakened by more than 10 years civil war. It has armed oppositions on the ground. And here we are talking about a regime which is still very robust, very institutionalized. It's not based upon single personality like in Syria. We are talking about a post-revolutionary regime which was able to endure the 8 years war of Iraq-Iran aggression war, the most bloody war in the Middle East, by the way, in the 80s.
But Russia is still reluctant to help. Russia is not
scenario.
helping right now, is it?
Pardon me?
Russia is still reluctant to help in any way.
Yes, apparently we can't see any Russian involvement, which is understandable because they don't have too much of resources, which may be of help to Iran. However, at certain point, Russia may deliver specific either expertise or even systems to support Iran should particularly in the domain of anti-aircraft systems and communication systems. That's what we may envision, but I don't think it'll be meaningful enough to change the course of this conflict. The course of this conflict will be determined by the resources and most of both sides, Israeli and Iranian. And when we talk about Iranian resources, we are talking mostly about stockpiles of ballistic missiles, which were domestically manufactured by Iran without the supply, without the support of Russia.
Łukasz Fyderek was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm Łukasz Fyderek. Please stay with us here on TVP World.